Hello, hello. Welcome back to another episode of Yarns for the Soul. I'm your host, Nicole, and very excited to be bringing you another guest episode today. Today I will be yarning with Sarah Robb, who is the founder of Spring with Sarah. She is a mindset and grief coach, and her story is equal parts devastating and inspiring. She went through the death of both of her parents while in her 20s, and she shares that story in a very vulnerable way, and I'm very grateful for her, for the way that she's able to talk about it with us and sharing her story. And she is now working as a grief and mindset coach. So this episode has just so many good nuggets, and I kind of love the way that those two things intertwine, and the way that the mindset work can really help you overcome anything, including grief, and some of the tools that she's used along the way. And she also shares, what she's up to at the moment and some of the awesome work that she's doing. So I am very excited to be able to bring you this episode. Hope you've been enjoying following along. I know there's been a bit of a hiatus as your host tries to sort her life out. I am heading across to the UK and Europe in less than a week now, so probably by the time you're listening to this I might have left New Zealand, which is very exciting, but means all things life admin have kind of taken priority. But am getting back into bringing you some more podcasts, some more mini yarns. Might have a different vibe for the next mini yarn and next guest episode, coming to you from the other side of the world, which is very exciting. So thank you for joining me here today. If you have been enjoying my yarns, would love if you can rate, review, subscribe on whatever platform you're listening to. You can go and find me on Instagram if you want to follow my journeys from here on out. And always appreciate any feedback. Let me know if you're enjoying it, any other topics that you'd love to hear me talk about. And also, if you want to be a guest, I am always happy to share, and love being able to create a space for other people to share as well. So thanks again for being here, and let's jump in. Hello, thank you so much for joining me, Sarah.
How are you today? Very exciting to be here.
Thank you so much. So, where do we start? I feel like you've got a whole, at least one lifetime worth of stories, if not more already.
Totally. That's a good question. Where do we start? Well, we can start wherever you would like to start. Where's going to be the best for you?
Yeah. Well, so you are the founder of Spring with Sarah, which is this magical mindset coaching business. So that's, I guess, present day version of you. But maybe do we jump into where that sort of came from in as much depth as you would like to share?
Totally. So for me, I've had a little bit of an interesting life. I grew up in Christchurch, and I then went down and studied in Dunedin as a student, a good scarfie, and had a lot of fun down there. My struggles and challenges started in my third year of university, when my father fell off a balcony and he actually died. So in my early 20s, I was faced with a lot of grief, and this was a real struggle
Yeah.
for me because I suppressed the pain, and I did a lot of alcohol and drugs, and really didn't know how to work with the grief that I was presented with. My father was actually an alcoholic, which made it quite difficult at the
Wow.
time. And just to tell you about my story, why don't we just jump straight on in for everybody who's listening and wants to hear
Yeah.
about my story? Um, about 6 years later, I had been on my personal development journey and really started learning how to heal and learning how to unpack the grief and the trauma that I had experienced in my younger
Mm.
years. And from there, I went on my big OE, like many of us do.
Yeah.
And I got another phone call while I was on my OE. And
Mm.
this phone call was to tell me that my mum had had a brain aneurysm. To make a long story short, 12 days later, on my return back from
Mm.
overseas, we found out that mum wasn't going to survive. So I was 26 years old with two dead parents and a
Wow.
world of grief ahead of me. And
Mm.
that was really the start of the evolution of Spring with Sarah. And a lot has happened in the last 5 years since all of this has happened.
I can't believe so you were only 20 when your dad died.
Yeah, I was 20 when Dad died. Yep.
Oh, right. So we did was that a workplace thing? Was there
So with Dad, my dad being an alcoholic was quite hard for me in my younger years because
mm,
with an alcoholic father, there's a lot of shame and a lot of guilt and a lot of embarrassment that can come with alcoholism. And I really
mm.
felt that in my teenage years, not being able to bring my friends home and things like
Oh,
that.
right.
And then he actually was up in the Marlborough Sounds and he fell off a balcony.
Wow. What was your relationship with him like?
Interesting
Obviously
that you asked
complicated.
that. Interesting that you asked that. My relationship with Dad was turbulent as a
Mm.
teenage girl. I'm sure many people know what a teenage girl's like. There was a lot of anger towards him. I didn't understand why he drank, and
Mm.
the work that I needed to do after my dad died for my own healing journey was like healing a relationship with the deceased. And
Mm.
that was an interesting journey for me and one that I now educate other people on how to heal relationships with the deceased as I've been able to do it for myself.
Because that's sort of this whole extra aspect to the grief process. And, it's hard enough losing someone that you've got really a close connection with and a great relationship, that's really tough. But when there's like that extra layer of healing a slightly difficult relationship, like how would you even begin to process that?
Yeah, great question. And
Mm.
interestingly, I just wrote a little bit of a blog on this because it is a big topic
Ah.
for people. And I think that when we look at memories and grief, a lot of people think that all the memories are light and easy and happy and fun when
Mm.
you look back on the people that you love. And sometimes you put them on a bit of a pedestal.
Yeah.
Um, and for me, the case was very different for my dad. There was a lot of tainted memories, a lot of hard memories, and it took a lot of work and a lot of healing to start healing that relationship when he wasn't alive. How do you
Mm.
start doing that? Well, it really requires a lot of self inventory
Yeah.
and a lot of awareness and support and starting to understand tools of personal development. Uh,
Mm.
and that was really what kick-started the healing journey for me in that situation.
Mm. Was there, before your mum died as well, was there a bit of a process where she could possibly help you heal through the loss of your father? And I mean, obviously, that's a whole nother situation for her to try and heal at the same time.
Definitely. It was definitely a complex situation. And after my dad died, my relationship with my mum really started to blossom.
Mm.
And we really became so close because I started to actually open up to her about what it felt like being a teenage girl in the situation. And she started to
Mm.
open up as what it felt like to be the wife of somebody who was
Yeah.
managing an alcoholic husband. And our relationship got so strong and we would talk every day. And I started to have quite a common fear that a lot of people have, and that being that when you've lost one parent, you start to fear losing the other parent. And
Mm.
the best thing about that was that I would tell mum that, and
All right.
I would say to her, I'm worried about you, and I'm worried what my life will be like if you die. And then when she
Wow.
did die, it was like we'd already had those conversations. Whilst it was kind of my worst nightmare and living that,
Mm.
um, I felt very lucky and grateful that I had been able to connect with my mum before she died.
Mm. It's like this bizarre silver lining that after losing one parent, you're kind of forced to talk about all that stuff and some of the like practical things about death that no one tells you. You start having those conversations,
Yes.
which is you don't really want to be having those conversations, and especially for you, you're still in your early 20s at that stage. But it kind of is helpful when you do have to figure that out. Because do you have any siblings, or are you the only child?
Yes, I have two older brothers, and all of
Yeah.
us have been on a really different journey. My middle brother, he has had a interesting journey as he found both mum and dad,
Oh my
and that
god.
brings a whole lot of trauma. And he went on his own journey with alcohol and rehab and all of those
Mm.
things. And I'm actually stoked to say to you today that he's about 3 years sober, and
Wow.
that's no mean feat for any
No.
addict. So that's been a real blessing in my life, being able to
Mm.
support my brother to get sober.
That's amazing. Mm. And you've got another older brother, is that right?
Yeah, and another older brother, he also had a difficult relationship with my
Mm.
and he is somebody who's working through the grief in his own time. He's got some young kids, which keep
Oh.
his life full and entertaining. Um,
Mm.
but together, we had a lot of similar things that I'm sure other people can resonate with. Family arguments. Death brings a lot of complexities, and it
Mm.
puts strain on relationships, and that's all part of grief. And if you're going through grief and everything's been happy days and there hasn't been arguments, I think, man, consider yourself lucky.
Because it's just sort of imagining you and your brothers being left to kind of pick up the pieces, and there's so many of those practical decisions that you have to make, and I can't even imagine what that's like, and you're only 26 at that stage.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it was definitely something that was challenging. But when I
Mm.
reflect on this, I really think that this has been what's made me, and starting to learn about grief and starting to learn about the power of the mind and starting to learn that change is possible has been, you know, so healing for me. And I've even got to the stage now where part of me believes that my parents died so that I could do this work and so that I could help other people on their journeys.
Mm. That's such an amazing perspective. Like, it's beautiful you've been able to get to that place because it could have easily gone a completely different direction.
Definitely, and it did for a
Yeah.
while, and it did for my brothers too. And
Mm.
that's all part of the journey is realizing, the typical famous quote that life is about the journey, not the destination.
Mm. Yeah. So you said you were overseas when you heard about your mum.
hmm
Where were you at the time?
I was in a remote town in Colombia. I
Oh,
was
wow.
about to move to Canada on my 2-year visa, and
Ah.
that flight home from Colombia to New Zealand
Oh.
is probably something that I still haven't quite been able to describe to people. Knowing that you may
Mm.
get off the plane and open your phone and your mum may not be alive. It
Mm.
was a really difficult time getting back to New Zealand. But I got home and mum was still alive, so I got to see her um,
Mm.
before she died, which is a real blessing, and I'm really grateful that I got those couple of days with her.
Yeah, exactly. Was it sort of like an unexplained medical sort of thing?
Yes, so it was a brain
Yeah.
aneurysm,
Mm.
and they can come out of the blue.
Right.
She had a couple of headaches the day before she had the brain aneurysm,
Mm.
um, but yeah, it was just a random brain clot, and yeah, then she pretty much lost her brain functioning.
Mm.
So yeah, that's how it all happened. It was very sudden,
Yeah.
and for me, I think some of the biggest lessons and learnings is, life is short and it can be taken unexpectedly,
Mm.
unexpectedly,
Yes.
and it's something that so many people take for granted how precious life is, and we often think it's not
Mm,
going to happen to us, or it's not going to happen to
exactly.
me. And the reality is that it can happen to anyone.
Mm, definitely doesn't discriminate.
Mm.
And I imagine, by the age of 26, having no parents and no one else around you really knows anything about that or what that's like or how to support you. Is that something that you struggled with as well?
I definitely struggled with nobody knowing how to support me and
Mm,
how to best support me. And the thing that I learned the most is that people can't read your mind. And
mm,
I learned that really quickly. You know, people didn't know what to do or how to help. And part of my job was actually communicating how they could best help me. It took me a little
mm.
while to work that out. And it actually came in my relationship. One day he turned around, my partner, and he said to me, Sarah, I can't read your mind. And from that moment forward, I was like, no one can read my mind. So I need to communicate what I need and how people
Mm.
can best help me.
Yeah. Is that something that I've sort of been discovering recently? And actually, sort of through the podcast and previous episode that I did with my sister, I've had, a couple of friends say they've listened to it and actually apologized to say, I felt like I was a shit friend at the time. And that's really hard to hear because they definitely weren't. But it was like, I actually had no idea what I needed, let alone how to communicate that or the brain capacity or energy to communicate anything or make any decisions.
Mm.
Um, so there's sort of, yeah, this other part of trying to figure out what you need, and actually you're the one that has to tell people because especially at that age, no one actually knows how to help you.
Yeah, and it's something
Mm.
that I've learned is, you've got to ask for what you want, or otherwise the answer will be no. And so I really learned that the hard way, and it's
Mm.
it's benefited me a lot being able to communicate what I need and how people can help me.
Mm. So how long have you been? So you're a coach, mindset coach, grief coach now. What was the journey from 26-year-old you to where you are now?
Well, it was an interesting one because after dad died, as I said, I suppressed the emotion and I
Mm,
burnt a lot of bridges. So after mum died, I knew straight away that I was going to do things differently. I
right.
wasn't going to take the same pathway that I took when my dad died. I felt pretty early on in the first 3 to 6 months after mum died that I had something great to offer and I had this fire in my belly and I knew
Mm,
that I wanted to help people on their grief journey. Now, I didn't do that straight away because I knew that I needed to take some time to heal and some time to process what had happened. But while I was in that first 2 years, I was
mm,
reading so many books, listening to podcasts, listening to audiobooks. I was learning as much as I possibly could about grief and loss and pain and trauma. And that was
mm,
all part of the healing journey for me, was starting to learn about it, because the more I learned about it, the more I realized that I wasn't alone and that
mm,
it happened to other people. And that really brought me a lot of hope, especially when I needed it.
mm. Did you find, like, what was the motivation, do you think, to really jump in, I guess, the second time around to be like, I'm going to do things differently?
There was this significant day that came around, and I was having an argument with my brother who was struggling at the time.
Mm,
And I had already done a lot of personal development work. There was a moment in my head where kind of that light bulb moment happened, and I made a pretty clear choice on this day. And I thought, I can either be the victim of both of my parents dying, or
mm,
I can choose to let this create me and I can help other people from this experience. I could choose to let it break me, or I could choose to let it make me. And
mm.
from that day forward, I knew that I was no longer going to be the victim of both my parents dying.
Wow. Do you have, are there moments where the sort of victim mode starts to kind of bubble up again and those stories start coming through.
Totally. Totally. I think that's the human experience, isn't it? And I think the key is it's not always having to be, at cause for your life. Um,
Mm,
the key is knowing when you're at the effect of the problem and being able to shift back over to being the creator of your life. I can fall into victim mode still now, 5 years down the track. Um,
mm,
the difference now is that I know that I'm here, which means that I have the awareness, which gives me the ability to make the choice to move back to being at cause or the creator of my life.
mm. Ah, I love that. That resonates so much because it's, yeah, realizing, part of the life's too short and actually being in creation of what you want and going out there and doing it is amazing. Um, and so you've done all this amazing training to get to where you are now. Um, I was doing some stalking, obviously. So you've done like a psychology degree, you've done counseling, you've done like NLP work,
Yep.
which is amazing. So how does that all sort of come together in the work that you do now?
Yeah, so it all has its own unique gifts. The biggest
Mm,
tool that I use is NLP, which for anyone who doesn't know what NLP is,
mm,
neuro linguistic programming, and it's about language on the mind and how our unconscious mind contributes to our reality. So that's the work that I'm really passionate about. I'm really passionate about language, and how it
mm.
creates our reality. And that was a real turning point for me. I went to Australia about 2.5, 3 years after mum died, and that cracked me right open. I started to really have the Tony Robbins experience, as some would know it, that full breakthrough,
Yeah.
and really that liberating feeling of, I'm here for more and I am
Mm,
good enough and I can do it. And that training really helped direct my path and it helped me create my business, and I still use the tools and strategies every day with my clients.
mm. How did you come across NLP initially? Had you experienced it before yourself?
No, I hadn't experienced it
Ah,
before. I have an amazing friend who I'm sure many people who may be listening to this podcast know. Bryony from Untapped had
yes.
actually got me onto NLP, and being a good friend of mine from university,
Ah,
she was like, Sarah, you've got to do this. You'll absolutely love it.
wow.
And I trusted her word and I went and did it. And it will be something that I know I'll remember for the rest of my life.
Mm. So how do you use NLP in your coaching work, particularly the grief work?
So NLP is works a lot with the unconscious mind. Now, if I've got clients who are in their first kind of 6 months to 1 year of
Mm,
grief, I don't use heaps of NLP. There's a real important part in grief that we grieve, that we
yes.
don't we don't suppress or move on too quickly, and people are allowed however much time they need to be in that really deep grief
Mm,
period. So the NLP work that I do is actually a lot more in the mindset coaching and helping
ah,
people break through anxiety, breaking through feeling stuck, breaking through beliefs of I'm not good enough or I'm not worthy or I'm not loved. And the
mm,
NLP modalities can create transformational change in those areas.
mm. So the how does the mindset work kind of connect with the grief work?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. The answer to that is that I've always been asked, so how did you get through this? Or if you were going to
Mm,
tell someone else like how you've done it, what would you
mm,
say to them? How do they do it too? And the answer to that is mindset.
mm,
So grief and mindset are interlinked because life is just a perception, right? We all
mm,
perceive life in different ways, and your ability to understand your mind and use tools and strategies through your mindset can create a new reality for you. So, grief and
Mm.
mindset are highly linked, and helping people through their grief journey with tools of the mindset is really important for the work that I do.
Mm. Are there sort of like a few key things, particularly early on in the first like 6 months or so, in terms of mindset that you would tell people that come to you that are experiencing grief?
Yeah, so one of the
Mm.
biggest ones I think is learning about emotions. A lot
Mm.
of people don't have a great understanding that emotions are just energy in our body that need to be
Mm.
moved. Emotions equal energy and motion. So we need to be able to move that energy. And so one of the really early on things that I teach clients is to be able to feel the grief rather than pushing
Mm.
it to the side or pretending like it's not there. It's actually really important that we feel that emotion and we release that emotion from our body so that it doesn't get stored. That's one thing that
Mm.
I educate people on really early on. The other thing for me is, you know, when you're grieving, you often feel like you're stuck or you've got tunnel vision or you don't know which way to turn. So,
Mm.
helping people create possibilities and creating choices is something that I really focus on early on in the grief journey as well.
Mm. Yeah, I love all of that. And I think it took me a while to actually probably return to a place of feeling. I was probably one of those people that, well, obviously didn't know what was happening anymore and kind of just tried to carry on and keep putting one foot in front of the other. And that didn't involve feeling because it was sort of like this big, scary thing. And you think, oh, if I lean too far into that and start feeling, I don't know how I'm going to get out. I think that's the things that's so uncertain and so such big energy. It's like, how do you actually lean into that?
Totally, and I think for me is
Mm.
that some people have never experienced the depth of these emotions, and I know that
Mm.
I hadn't experienced the depth of these emotions, so they're kind of scary to feel when you're there. And that's why a lot of people want to
Mm.
run away from their emotions. So a lot of the work is creating the safety and helping reaffirm to people that they won't be there forever and it will change and it will adapt and it will become more bearable. The more
Mm.
we try to push our emotions away, the more they manifest into something else, whether that's
Yeah.
resentment or anger or projecting onto other people.
Mm. And I think what I've learned as well is the idea that emotions that aren't felt are stored in the physical body, and then that brings itself out in other areas. And realizing I've been through quite a process of actually nervous system level healing, which is so powerful. So it's interesting the connection between the emotional and the physical, even in the early stages of grieving.
Definitely. And that's why I encourage everyone to get the support they need so that they can feel the depth of those emotions. And
Mm.
people don't have to do that alone. I think that
Mm.
people, especially in New Zealand, we've got this stigma that we don't reach out for help until we're, in a really bad place. Um,
Mm.
and I think we really need to change that stigma and actually realizing that you can still get help and still get support even when you're doing really well in life. And that's what
Mm.
I've changed my mindset to is, even when I'm doing really well, I've still got a coach because they're going to help me get even better.
Yes, exactly. Like there's no ceiling on how good you can feel or how successful you're being in life. You can keep going.
Totally.
Mm. So do you have people come to you at all sort of different stages of grief? Is it mainly people early on or people later down the track as well?
Interestingly, I probably have more mindset clients like anxiety and
Mm.
feeling stuck and depression or starting a business than I do
Oh, right.
grief. I probably have a 60-40 split. And the
Yeah.
40% who are in the grief journey or whatever that may be for them is all different So sometimes I'll get a
Mm,
client who's in the first couple of months, right up to people who have still experiencing really intense grief 6, 7 years down the track. So everybody's journey with grief is so unique and individual for
mm,
them. And I think, one of my favorite quotes is, grief is like a fingerprint, unique and different for everyone. And
mm,
it just rings so true because grief is so unique to each
mm.
individual.
I think it's still something that probably, I don't know if triggering is the right word, but makes me angry and reflecting back to my past self and trying to find my way through this new world and, you know, still turning up in your relationships and your friendships, and then you have to go back to work at some point. Like all of those sorts of steps that society just expects you to carry on in some form and not actually knowing where to turn. I think I just did some Googling and found a really affordable like grief counselor when I was living in Auckland and went to a few sessions with her. But beyond that, sort of, you don't really know where to look. And I think from my experience, I felt like because no one was actually checking in, I mean, my friends didn't actually know how to do that or what that would look like. And then at work, no one really asked any questions. So you're not getting any of that feedback. So
Mm.
it's sort of like, oh, okay, this must be normal. I'll just keep putting one foot in front of the other. Did you find that?
Definitely. And I think that the best mindset that I adopted after mum died was one day at a time.
Mm,
And often grief can push us really far out into the future and it creates anxiety and worry and uncertainty and panic attacks, which it did for
mm,
me. And it also pushes you really far into the past where
mm,
the what ifs, I should have, if only I did this or that. And the biggest thing that I learned on my grief journey and which has helped me heal from both my parents dying is properly learning how to live in the present. And I know that some
mm,
people think that sounds corny, but it's the reality is when you practice how to do this, and remember that word is practice because it is a practice,
mm,
it will change your life. And it has completely changed mine. Um, and it didn't come easily, but every day, the mindset of one day at a time really helped contribute to me learning how to live in the present.
mm. And it's just a matter of, yeah, as you said, finding support and reaching out and coaches like yourself to kind of guide you on that process and give you the tools. Because I feel like eventually I kind of got there myself and sort of dived into different books and podcasts and picked those things up along the way. But there was no sort of structure to that. I was very much muddling my way through.
Definitely. And I think
Mm,
sometimes people think that the tools and the strategies are really complex. And I was saying to a client
mm,
yesterday, isn't it amazing how simple these tools are? Just some people don't know how to use them or have never heard of them. The tools and strategies that I teach and that I work with, they're basic and they're simple
mm,
and they work. And I always say to my clients, there's three important things required for change. You need repetition, consistency, and accountability. And with those things, if you put
mm,
all of those three things into place, change will come for you.
mm. And I guess that's where a coach like yourself, the accountability aspect, because it's hard to keep yourself accountable, right?
Definitely. And that's why I've had many coaches in my time too, because,
Mm,
and still have many coaches in my life, I'm sure, and I look forward
mm,
to who they may be. But they really do support you in a way that holds you accountable and it holds you to your highest regard. I think that's
mm,
what a coach does well is they see your highest potential and they hold you to that standard.
mm. It's interesting because yeah, as I've sort of probably touched on in the podcast before and done courses with Bryony through Untapped, and my personal development journey probably came about at the right time. And I reflect back on it and think actually, possibly before that, I wasn't ready to delve in deep.
Mhm.
And the type of support I needed was more like counseling or therapy rather than diving into personal development. So it's, yeah, you're kind of being kind to yourself and realizing the timeline is completely different for everyone. Because I remember the counsellor that I saw early on in Auckland talked about the year of firsts, and she had a graph actually. I've just remembered that. She showed me this sort of, however it was measured. You get through the year of firsts, and then in theory, it's meant to get better. But actually, reflecting back for me, I definitely think of it of at least 2 years before I started to get out of just survival mode.
Mm-hmm.
So it's hard when there's sort of these social constructs of what the process is, but it's not. It's never going to be linear.
Grief is definitely not linear, and I can totally
Mm,
relate to what you've said. And I think the reason people kind of want those time frames, how long will it last, or
mm,
when will I be over this? Um, they want to be able to prepare their mind or their body.
mm,
And grief, it's not like that. You don't get over it. Uh,
mm,
you learn to live with it, navigate through it, and grow from it. Uh, and I think that the perception of when will this be over is the wrong perception.
mm. How would you reframe it for people that are just looking for a timeline?
I think the timeline is it's the journey.
Mm,
It's a journey, and it will change and adapt. And knowing that you're on that journey um, is is the mindset that I have, and one day at a time,
mm,
especially in the early days. There's the only thing that is constant in life is change. We all know
mm.
that, and some of us may not be willing to accept that. So it's really important to know that grief doesn't, you don't get over it.
Mm,
And it's something that you will learn how to navigate as you grow on your journey.
mm. I think that's one of the hardest things is sort of the processing and accepting as much as you can accept it that it's not going to go away, that this is your new version of reality. And I think early on I really struggled with that because it was like, I didn't choose this, I didn't ask for this version of reality. And then all of a sudden you've kind of got no choice but to accept it. I guess that's where the mindset work really comes in handy in reframing it. Um, I was wondering, as people, as you go through the process, and I find, for me, it was over 4 years ago now that dad died, and there'll be sort of certain things in life that kind of trigger a memory or an emotion. Like, how do you deal with those things that come up in everyday life? Because they're never expected, you don't see them coming. And then
Yeah.
all of a sudden, you've got this wave.
Again, it comes to mindset and perception. And
Mm,
when I still cry a lot, like sometimes every
mm,
day. And people see me as this strong, resilient person. And the reality is that
mm,
I'm actually really emotional, except the difference is that I don't beat myself up for being emotional. I accept that it's part of who I am. And instead of creating the stories of why aren't you over this, or why are you still crying, or, I just am really compassionate with myself, and I accept that the grief is there and I work through it. And I look after myself after I've had, a good cry, and I go and do something for
mm,
myself. And that's come through, the work, and being really cautious of the stories that I tell myself. It's okay to cry at
mm,
any time. It's when we put the negative connotations and the negative
mm,
stories behind it that we create the suffering.
mm. That's so true. And I think we pick up on this idea from wherever it comes from that, crying is weakness or worrying about what other people are thinking about you. And often that's just the stories we're telling ourselves in our heads. And yeah, I've definitely lent into that more recently as well. And the number of times that I've cried like in public and cafes and just catching up with friends and talking about stuff and all the emotions come up. But you sort of reach a stage where you're like, this is me. And you're sort of more unapologetic about it.
And I think that's a beautiful way to aspire to get to, because, as we
Mm,
said right at the start, emotions are energy in our body. and they need to be moved. And the other thing I think
Mm,
about tears is that we're taught in society that, tears equal sadness. And that's just not
mm,
true. I cry when I'm really happy. I cry when I'm proud, especially of
yeah.
myself. I cry when, I'm feeling inspired. And so,
Mm,
again, we've just put a meaning behind this word crying, and
mm,
it doesn't actually necessarily mean somebody's sad. So it's really important that we know that language is powerful and it's the meaning that
mm,
we create behind it.
mm. That's really beautiful. And I hadn't actually really thought about it in that way as all those moments in my past where I've cried. And, there are moments of pride in there. And that's actually really beautiful and getting to celebrate yourself. Um, yeah, so I love that you've just reframed that for me. Thank you.
It's okay. I took me a while to reframe that for myself. And I know when I share that with clients as well, they're like, wow, that's so simple. And I had never thought of it like that. But crying is just an
Mm,
expression of emotion. It doesn't
yes.
necessarily mean a specific emotion, it's just an expression of emotion.
Mm. There was another thing that I wanted to touch on is something that I personally struggled with as well that I sort of mentioned before about the going back to work process and the fact that the sort of statutory bereavement leave is insane.
Yeah.
um, and going back and yeah, stepping back into full time work, sitting at a desk every day, and as if everything's gone back to normal. Um, and I kind of wonder whether it was a situation of like my employers and manager not knowing themselves how to handle the situation if they haven't been through anything like that themselves,
Mm.
um, or not really having policies or processes in place. Um, but I know you've been doing some speaking recently as well and going into different businesses and organizations. I was wondering if there's any light that you can shed on how to go back to work as an individual or for employers to support someone.
Yeah, so I have been doing a few talks lately, a lot at law
Mm,
firms, actually, which has
yeah.
been really interesting. And I think the key to this is that the communication is the key. Um,
Mm,
Communicating how you're getting on, whether it's with your boss or another employee that you trust. But often, I think there's this stigma, and I know that I felt it when I was in the corporate world. Is you
mm,
walk in the door and you take off the grief hat, you sit down at your desk and work all day, and then as you leave the door, you put the grief hat back on, and it just
yeah.
doesn't work like that. So I think that, the more that we can educate employers and the more we can educate organizations about grief and how it impacts
Mm,
someone and how it impacts the mind and how we can better support people, is actually going to be a lot more beneficial for businesses. And I
mm,
law firms that have jumped on board recently, kudos to them. Not only are
mm,
they learning about grief and how to manage people on the other side of the table with wills and estates, but they're
mm,
learning how to better support their employees who have gone through grief and loss.
mm. It really made me kind of realize that even though you're in the workplace, you're not just showing up as an employee, you're always bringing your full self to the table, and that's going to look different on different days. And realizing that you deserve proper support from an employer and you can't just put those parts of yourself in a box, like you said, leave whichever hat it might be at the door and then turn up as if everything's fine.
Yeah, and I think that it's really important that employees, take grief seriously, because grief is something that really impacts our employee mental health. It's impacting
Mm,
suicide rates. It's impacting a huge sector. Um, and, you know, traditionally, grief isn't seen as something that's got that much impact. But for me, it's like the root cause of so many things. When somebody's
mm,
suppressing their grief or not working through it, that's can seriously lead to addiction and depression and
Mm,
anxiety, and it really contributes to our mental health and society. So, the more we can start learning about grief and the fundamentals and foundations, the better equipped we're going to be to support each other and our workforce.
mm. Do you think there's a bit of a shift, hopefully, towards that acceptance and that understanding and a good reception from the talks that you've given?
Definitely a good reception from the companies that I've been in recently,
Mm,
and I think that they were really excited and welcoming the idea of talking about a new topic. And grief has always had a
mm,
taboo and a stigma around
mm,
talking about it. So as we continue to open this door, I think that more businesses and more employees are going to get on board with it. It's just going to be that ripple effect. And I'm not going to say that it's all going to happen at the same time, but one business at a time, and that flow on effect in the years
mm,
to come will be massive.
mm. Yeah, you're right. It's just sort of continuing to talk about it and speak up, and people like you sharing your experience and going into different organizations
Mm.
to talk about it. It's just probably an ongoing education process, and it does make me it's a nice feeling hearing that there are law firms that are interested in hearing from someone like you as well, given that some of my past experiences in law were not always positive.
Mm.
um, so it's nice to know that they're actually willing to engage and want to improve as well.
Definitely, and from what
Mm,
I've seen, it's great to see that there's people leading that. And I think
mm,
that once some of those big firms like I've been in are leading that, the other firms will start jumping on board.
mm.
I'm not sure, I haven't worked in a law firm, but I'm sure there's a little bit of competition between the law firms. So if one law firm's doing one thing, I'm sure all the others want to jump on board.
Yes, just to be seen like they're doing the right thing. But if it's actually helping people, I'm not going to argue with it.
Totally, totally.
Yeah. Um, the next thing I wanted to ask you about was you did a magical project around Christmas last year, and I think you'd done it before. Um, would love to hear more about the background to that as well.
Yes, so 2 years running, we've had Christmas
Mm,
Connection. And this is an initiative that I created because I really missed my parents at Christmas time. And I know
mm,
anyone else who's lost a family member or a friend, Christmas can be really, really hard. We're every day reminded of our losses. And
mm,
whilst so many people are celebrating and, you know, having all this fun, we're reminded of what's missing in our lives. So the initiative is where I wanted it to be something that could bring healing for people, and the beauty is that it's just done just that. So
mm,
Christmas Connection is an initiative where people send me a message to their loved ones in spirit, and I have all these beautifully cut pieces of wood that are like discs, and I drill holes in them,
mm,
and I write the message on these pieces of wood. Then I decorate the tree for the month of December,
mm,
and then on Christmas Eve, all the pieces of wood are burnt. And the analogy that I use is, nothing can be destroyed, it can only be
mm,
transformed into something else. So those messages are being crossed over to our loved ones in spirit. Last year was
mm.
so exciting. We had a stuff article written about us. We were on
Yes.
the radio, and it really took off. We had messages coming in from all around the world, the USA,
Oh.
China, all different places. So I'm really looking forward to it this year. The hard thing this year is that getting it on a bigger scale means that we're going to need to get some volunteers on board and hopefully some
Mm.
sponsorship as well.
Yeah, I was following along as you put the updates on social media and just couldn't fathom the amount of work that went into it and like chopping up each individual disc and then writing on it. But it was amazing seeing it all come together and all the messages on the tree at the end of it.
I think that the beauty for me is that when I have the time to put my energy into something that I'm passionate about, especially at
Mm,
Christmas time, it it feels like not only am I helping other people grieving, but it's really healing for me.
mm,
Um, and it allows me to connect with my parents in a different way. And I know that it allows other people to connect with their loved ones in a different way. And I think it's just a beautiful way to celebrate our loved ones during such a festive time.
It's amazing to have something like that because I definitely resonate with what you're saying, and it's like sitting down to Christmas dinner or lunch or whatever it is, and then you can't help but notice who's not there, right? And then again, it's easy for the like victim mode to come back up and think, well, why me? Everyone else is happily being festive and celebrating and having an amazing time with their families, which, as they should. But then it comes back to why did this have to happen to me and my family? So it's amazing that you've created this initiative and so many people got involved. Because how many people did you have write in last year?
Our goal was 1,000, and so we
Mm.
got 1,050, and we pushed right till the end to get those numbers come in, which was very exciting. And it did take a lot of work and a lot of energy. And if anyone is listening to this podcast and knows any good sponsors or knows anyone who wants to
Yeah.
help continue to create this initiative in the years to come, because it's not an initiative that
Mm.
I can run on my own at this scale.
Mm.
So I am looking for new ideas on how I can continue to run it to provide that healing for people during that time.
Mm. I'm so excited to see what it evolves into.
Hopefully something big, because it's if
Yes.
you're reaching other countries, it's so exciting when you getting messages. I even got a message from the Ukraine, which I thought was absolutely
Wow.
stunning. I was like, how special is that? So it's
Yeah.
something that is a passion project, and it also brings me so much love and light, being
Mm.
able to support people in different ways.
Mm. There's one final thing that I wanted to ask about is as an avid follower of your like social media and particularly Instagram, you always have these lovely quotes and inspirational messages, but you've also had flowers quite recently, which I've absolutely loved. So I was curious whether you've always been a gardener, if that's always been a passion, or if this sort of a recent like cultivating, literally, if that's actually helped in your healing process as well.
Yeah, so the gardening thing is another passion project. And no, I haven't
Mm.
loved gardening my whole life. I used to look at my parents and be like, why would you want to do that? That looks so boring.
Yeah.
And wow, how times have changed. So
Yes.
part of the gardening and starting to grow my own flowers and flower gardens and sunflowers and things is
Mm.
that as I've been on this healing journey, there's something so special from taking a seed to a seedling to a flower, then being able to collect the seeds and being able to replant for the next year. Now, not
Mm.
only do I love the visual look of flowers, but they are so symbolic in the way that they grow, and we are just like a flower.
Mm.
We experience changes in seasons. We experience challenges. Sometimes, life can be taken too soon, and the same can happen with a flower or a seedling or a plant.
Mm.
And when you start to actually dig in deeper to this, you start to realize that, well, we are nature. Nature is not something separate from us. And so being able to connect with nature has not only been part of my healing journey, but it's brought me so much joy. And
Mm.
it's a great way that I feel connected to my parents.
Mm. Is the connection because they were such avid gardeners themselves? Is that part of where it comes from?
Yes, maybe, but I think the connection is stronger in
Mm.
the metaphor of growth. I say to
Mm.
clients, growth isn't comfortable. When a seedling or a bulb is sprouting, that bulb has to go through real discomfort for it to be able to get to its next stage in its growth cycle. We're no different to that. And the whole growth and change and evolution of humans and nature has really taught me that everything lives and everything dies.
Mm,
And that in itself has made me realize just how important life is now. And that
mm,
has brought me, great comfort in my own, grief journey.
mm. I think that's so beautiful, and it fits in perfectly with Spring with Sarah.
Totally. And I love at the moment, it's autumn here in New Zealand, and
Mm,
being able to see the opposite of spring, autumn, every season serves
mm,
its purpose. And being able to see the color change in the leaves and the leaves falling off the trees is that whole rebirth
mm,
stage, and ready for the winter months. When you start to dig into the seasons and cycles of life, that's how you start to learn to live in the present. When people say, well, how did you start to
mm,
learn how to live in the present? All you have to do is pick one tree on your street right now and look at it every day for the next 2 weeks, and you will notice so much change.
mm. That's beautiful. Oh, I feel so much happier already. Thank you so much for joining us, Sarah. There's been so many nuggets that you've shared, and I really appreciate you taking the time to share your story with us as well.
It's been an absolute pleasure to be on here, and thank you for anyone who is listening. If you do want to reach out, please do feel free. I have people reaching out a lot, and I love chatting and connecting with anyone who resonates with my story or resonates with anything that I've said today. But it's an absolute pleasure to be on here. Thank you so much, Nicole.